Grace Harper's hands trembled as she gripped her service pistol, the weight familiar even after 5 years of retirement. At 68, she'd promised herself those days were over. Rex's bark shattered the silence, sharp, urgent, the same alert he'd used when they worked together. His massive German shepherd body vibrated with tension, focused on the basement door, where the old sewing machine hummed relentlessly below. Outside, Marcus Thornton's sedan sat in the driveway, engine ticking as it cooled. Grace's finger hovered over the trigger. Call 911 and wait, or trust the instincts that had kept her alive through 35 years on the force? Red and blue lights flickered through the window. Too far away. The sewing machine stopped. Silence pressed against her eardrums. "Rex," she whispered, "with me. Just like old times." She opened the basement door. But to understand how she got here, we need to go back 3 months. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Grace Harper woke at 5 a.m. to an empty house that echoed with ghosts. At 68, her body moved through routines worn smooth by repetition, coffee brewing, toast burning slightly the way Robert used to like it, though he'd been gone 5 years now. The kitchen table sat 4, but only 1 chair showed wear. She ate standing at the counter, staring at the photo magnetized to her refrigerator. Robert in his workshop, arm around their son Michael in his police uniform. Both gone now. Heart attack took Robert. Michael's death 3 years ago still didn't make sense. PTSD, they said. Pills and despair. Grace had blamed herself ever since, convinced she'd pushed him too hard to be the perfect cop. Rex padded into the kitchen, tags jingling. 7 years old, black and tan coat gleaming, the German shepherd represented the last thread connecting Grace to her former life. They'd worked together for 7 years in the K-9 unit, and when she retired, Rex came with her. His intelligent brown eyes tracked her movements, reading her mood the way he'd been trained to read suspects. "Just you and me, boy," she murmured, scratching behind his alert ears. The mortgage notice on the counter demanded attention. 3 months behind, $1,200 monthly on a pension that barely stretched. The bank's language was polite but final. Pay or lose the house Robert built with his own hands. Grace's life had contracted to this: walks with Rex, coffee that grew cold, conversations with photographs, and the growing certainty that she was simply marking time until she could join her husband and son. The moving truck next door interrupted her spiral. Grace watched through the kitchen window as a thin woman directed the unloading, minimal furniture, mostly boxes. 2 girls clung close, one about 9 with watchful eyes, the younger maybe 6, silent and wide-eyed. The woman kept glancing over her shoulder, scanning the street with the hypervigilance Grace recognized from decades of police work. Something felt wrong. Grace's instincts, dulled by grief and isolation, flickered weakly back to life. Rex growled low in his throat, focused on the neighboring house. Not territorial. This was his alert stance, the one he used when he sensed danger. "What is it, boy?" Grace followed his gaze. The woman was directing movers with an antique sewing machine, treating it with unusual care. She had it placed prominently in the living room, immediately covering it with a sheet. Even from this distance, Grace could see the dark circles under the woman's eyes, the fading bruises on her forearms quickly hidden beneath long sleeves. That afternoon, Grace baked cookies using Robert's recipe, the first time she'd baked anything in 3 years. She crossed the yard with the plate, telling herself it was neighborly courtesy. But her cop brain was already cataloging details. No furniture beyond basics, suitcases still visible through windows, the covered sewing machine positioned like a shrine, and that woman's fear-sharp eyes. When Becky answered the door, Grace saw her own past reflected back. Another woman trying to survive something unspeakable. The woman who answered Grace's knock looked like she'd been running for years. Rebecca Thornton, just Becky, please, stood in the doorway with shoulders hunched defensively, one hand gripping the frame as if ready to slam the door at any moment. Up close, the bruises were more visible, yellowing at the edges, fingerprint-shaped on her upper arms. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Grace said, offering the cookies with a grandmother's smile she'd practiced in the mirror. "I'm Grace Harper. I live next door with my dog, Rex." At the mention of the dog, two faces appeared behind Becky's legs. The older girl had dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, eyes that had seen too much, too soon. The younger one pressed against her sister, thumb in her mouth, despite being school-aged. "Does your dog bite?" the older girl asked, her voice carrying a weight no 9-year-old should carry. Grace knelt slowly, making herself less threatening. "Only bad people, sweetheart. Rex is very good at knowing who's bad and who's good." Something flickered in the girl's eyes. Hope, maybe, or calculation. "Then he'd protect us?" "Lily, that's enough," Becky interjected quickly, her smile tight. "Thank you for the cookies, Mrs. Harper. That's very kind." The door closed before Grace could respond, but not before she glimpsed the interior. Bare walls, suitcases still packed and stacked, and that covered sewing machine sitting in the otherwise empty living room like a silent guardian. That night at 10 p.m., Rex's behavior shifted. He'd been lying peacefully by Grace's chair when suddenly his ears snapped forward, his entire body going rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his focus laser-pointed on the neighbor's house. Grace followed his gaze. Lights glowed behind drawn curtains next door. Then she heard it. The distinctive rhythm of a sewing machine running at an odd hour. Through the thin walls of their ranch-style homes, the sound carried clearly in the quiet neighborhood. "Easy, boy," Grace murmured, but Rex wouldn't settle. He stood, walked to the window, and released a sharp bark. Not his territorial bark. This was his canine alert, the sound he made when he detected danger. Grace made a note in the journal she'd kept since her police days. Day 1. Rex alerting to neighbor's house, 10 p.m. Sewing machine running. The pattern repeated nightly. Every evening between 8 and 10, Rex would position himself at the window, hackles raised, releasing those urgent alert barks. The sewing machine would run until midnight or later, an incessant humming that vibrated through the shared wall. Grace tried to rationalize it. Maybe Becky worked night shifts at home. Maybe she was nervous in a new place and sewing calmed her. But Rex had never been wrong before. In 7 years of partnership, his instincts had saved Grace's life more times than she could count. By the end of the first week, Grace's cop brain couldn't ignore the accumulating details. The children never played outside. Becky only left the house for quick grocery runs, her eyes constantly scanning the street before she exited her car. The curtains stayed drawn day and night, and that sewing machine kept running at hours when most people slept. On Thursday morning of week 2, everything changed. Grace was walking Rex around the block, letting him sniff his usual spots, when he suddenly stopped at the fence line between their properties. He began digging frantically at the base, whining with urgency. "Rex, what have you got?" Grace bent down, her knees protesting, and found a crumpled piece of paper wedged under the fence. She smoothed it open with trembling hands. The handwriting was childish, printed in careful letters. "Help us." Below the words, a child had drawn a simple picture, a stick-figure dog next to a stick-figure house. An arrow pointed from the dog to the house. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. One of those girls had written this and deliberately placed it where Grace would find it. She pocketed the paper and continued her walk, her surveillance training kicking in. Don't react. Don't let anyone watching know you found something important. Just keep walking like nothing happened. That afternoon she baked another pie, apple this time, and carried it to Becky's door. The older girl, Lily, answered while her mother was in the shower. "Did you drop something in the yard, honey?" Grace asked gently, watching the girl's face carefully. Lily's eyes widened. Then she blinked deliberately, slowly. "No, ma'am." But her hand moved to her ear, touching it 3 times in rapid succession. A signal. Grace had seen enough undercover work to recognize a signal when she saw one. Becky appeared then, hair wet, face tight with anxiety. "Lily, who's at the door?" The fear in Becky's voice told Grace everything. This family wasn't just nervous. They were hiding, and someone was hunting them. Grace waited until Monday morning to make the call. Linda Hayes had been her trainee 20 years ago, back when Grace was still training rookies instead of working K-9 units. Now Linda was a detective herself, sharp and capable, with enough respect for her former mentor to take an unusual call seriously. "Grace Harper." Linda's voice warmed with genuine affection. "Haven't heard from you in months. How are you holding up? I need you to run a plate for me." The warmth shifted to caution. "Grace, you've been retired 5 years. What's going on?" Grace explained carefully. The new neighbors, Rex's behavior, the help note, the suspicious car that had been circling the block. She kept her voice level, factual, the way she'd been trained to report observations without editorializing. Linda's silence stretched long enough that Grace thought the connection had dropped. Finally, "You sure you're not seeing patterns that aren't there? Sometimes after retirement, especially after loss." "Run the plate, Linda, please." The results came back that afternoon. Grace was weeding her front garden, keeping one eye on the neighbor's house, when her phone rang. "Vehicle registered to Marcus Thornton," Linda said without preamble. "Detective, Portland PD, clean record, decorated officer. Why would one of our own be watching your neighbor's house?" Grace's hands went cold. "Thornton, Marcus Thornton. Run another name for me, Rebecca Thornton. And cross-reference with a SIDS case about 8 years ago. Portland area." She heard Linda's fingers flying across a keyboard, then a sharp intake of breath. "Grace, what the hell is this? Tell me what you found." Rebecca Thornton filed a restraining order 6 months ago against Marcus Thornton. Domestic violence complaint dismissed for insufficient evidence. They're married, 10 years, 2 children currently, ages 9 and 6. But there was a third child, Benjamin Thornton, deceased at 2 years old. Death certificate says SIDS. Linda paused. "Grace, the investigating officer on Benjamin's case was you." The garden spade fell from Grace's hands. She was back in the morgue 8 years ago, staring at a tiny body on a steel table. Benjamin Thornton, 2 years old, supposedly a victim of sudden infant death syndrome. But Grace had seen the bruises, small finger-shaped marks on the child's neck that the medical examiner had tried to explain away as post-mortem lividity. Those bruises were ante-mortem, Grace had insisted to her captain. Someone strangled that baby. The captain had been furious. "You're accusing Detective Thornton, one of our own? Based on what, Harper? Your gut feeling?" "Based on evidence." "There is no evidence. The ME ruled it SIDS. Case closed. But Grace had refused to sign off on the report. She'd written her concerns in the case notes, recommended further investigation, interviewed the mother separately. Rebecca had been too terrified to speak, her eyes screaming what her mouth wouldn't say. Grace had known, had absolutely known, that Marcus Thornton had killed his son. 2 weeks later, Grace was transferred to the K-9 unit, effectively buried in a position meant as punishment. The case was closed. Marcus Thornton remained a respected detective. "Grace, you still there?" She picked up the spade with shaking hands. "I was right 8 years ago. He killed that baby. And now Rebecca's running from him. That's a serious accusation. I need surveillance on Rebecca's house and on Marcus's movements. I can't get approval for that without evidence." "Then I'll get you evidence." That Tuesday, everything went wrong. Grace had just returned from rushing Rex to the emergency vet. He'd been vomiting blood since dawn. "Doctor." Sarah Chen's diagnosis hit like a physical blow. Rat poison, deliberately administered within the last 48 hours. "Someone fed this to him intentionally," Dr. Chen explained, her face grim. "The dose was calculated to kill a dog Rex's size. He needs emergency surgery or he won't survive the week." "How much?" $5,000. Grace's bank account held $800. Her pension check wouldn't arrive for another week. The house payment was already 3 months behind. Dr. Chen's hand touched her shoulder gently. "Grace, I can arrange a payment plan." "No!" Grace's voice came out fierce. "Do the surgery. I'll get the money." She took out a loan against the house, adding another burden to her mountain of debt. But Rex had saved her life a dozen times during their years together. Now it was her turn. While Rex was in surgery, Grace's phone buzzed. Linda. "Marcus took personal leave. Not at station. Where is he?" Grace drove home too fast, her heart pounding. She spotted Marcus's sedan immediately, parked 3 houses down from Rebecca's, engine running, Marcus sitting inside, watching the house like a predator, waiting for prey to emerge. Grace parked in her own driveway and got out slowly, maintaining visual contact with Marcus's car. For 2 hours, they sat in silent standoff. Rebecca's house showed no movement, curtains drawn tight. Grace texted Linda. "He's here. Send patrol." Linda's response crushed her. "On what grounds? He's sitting in his car on a public street." "Restraining order. Expired last week. Rebecca didn't renew." Marcus finally emerged from his car, stretching casually, and began walking toward Rebecca's house. Grace intercepted him on the sidewalk. "Detective Thornton." Marcus turned, his face arranging itself into surprised pleasantness. "Mrs. Harper, I didn't know you lived here. I know exactly who you are and what you did." The pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, and Grace saw cold calculation in his eyes. Then he smiled. "I'm just checking on my family. That's not a crime. Harassment is. Is it harassment for a father to visit his children?" He took a step closer. "The restraining order expired. I'm not on her property. I'm not breaking any laws. Legal checkmate." They both knew it. Marcus's smile widened. "Enjoy your retirement, Mrs. Harper. Stay out of police business." He walked back to his car slowly, deliberately, and drove away. Grace knocked on Rebecca's door, but no one answered. She spoke to the wood. "Mrs. Thornton, I was the officer who investigated Benjamin's death. I believed you then. I believe you now. When you're ready, I'm here." That night, the sewing machine ran until 3 in the morning. Grace didn't sleep at all. The knock on Grace's door came at 7 a.m. on Friday, soft and hesitant. Lily stood on the porch alone, glancing nervously back at her house where a neighbor's car sat in the driveway. "Mom's at a doctor appointment," Lily whispered. "The lady next door is watching Ava. Mom doesn't know I'm here." Grace ushered her inside quickly. "Does your mother know you came to talk to me?" Lily shook her head, her thin shoulders trembling. "But I need to tell someone before it's too late." They sat at Grace's kitchen table, the same table where Grace had sat alone for 3 years. Lily's hands twisted in her lap, and Grace recognized the body language of someone carrying an unbearable secret. "Your father killed Benjamin," Grace said gently, "and your mother has proof." Lily's eyes went wide. "How did you know?" "I've been a cop a long time, sweetheart. Tell me everything." The story spilled out in a rush. Lily had been only 1 year old when Benjamin died, too young to remember. But when she turned 8, Becky had sat her down and told her the truth. Benjamin had colic, cried constantly. Marcus had lost his temper one night and strangled the baby. Becky had installed a nanny camera weeks earlier, worried about Marcus's increasingly violent outbursts. The camera caught everything. "The police took the camera," Lily said, her voice small. "Daddy said it got lost. But Mom had backed up the video to a USB drive before they came. She hid it in Grammy Eleanor's sewing machine." "Who's Grammy Eleanor?" "Daddy's mom. She gave Mom the sewing machine as a wedding present. But before Grammy died, she told Mom the machine had a secret compartment. She said if Mom ever needed to hide something from Daddy, the machine would protect her." Grace leaned forward. "Did Marcus kill Eleanor too?" "We think so. Grammy died real sudden, like she just went to sleep. But Lily heard Daddy talking on the phone once, saying Grammy was getting too mouthy, and he handled it. That was a week before she died. The girl was 9 years old, carrying knowledge that would crush most adults. Grace wanted to wrap her in a blanket and promise her the world would be safe again. But she'd learned long ago not to make promises she couldn't keep. "Why is your mother running now, after 8 years?" Lily's face crumpled. "Mom's pregnant again. She doesn't think Daddy knows, but she heard him on the phone 2 weeks ago. He was talking to someone saying, 'I'm not raising another brat. I'll take care of it like last time.'" Grace's blood ran cold. Marcus was planning to kill another child. "Mrs. Harper?" Lily's voice was barely audible. "Daddy knows about you?" "What do you mean?" "I heard him yesterday, after you talked to him. He was on the phone saying that old cop Harper lives next door. She's the one who tried to investigate Benjamin. I need to handle her too." Grace absorbed this information calmly, though her pulse quickened. She'd been threatened before, but this time felt different. This time, she had something to lose, someone to protect. "That's why I came," Lily continued, "to warn you, and to ask, can you and Rex protect us? Mom's too scared to ask for help, but we're going to die if someone doesn't stop him." Grace took the girl's trembling hands in her own weathered ones. "Yes, sweetheart. I promise. Rex and I will protect you." After Lily hurried home, Grace called Linda immediately. This time Linda listened without interruption. When Grace finished, Linda agreed to come over that evening to strategize. Linda arrived at 6 p.m. with file boxes under her arms, everything she'd been able to pull on Marcus Thornton without raising suspicion. They spread documents across Grace's dining room table while Rex kept watch by the window, his attention never wavering from the house next door. "The SIDS case is suspicious as hell," Linda said, flipping through Grace's original report. Your notes are detailed. The ME's ruling doesn't match the physical evidence you documented. The ME changed his ruling after pressure from above, Grace said bitterly. Marcus had friends in high places. Still does. He's tight with Captain Patterson, who was his supervisor during the Benjamin investigation. Linda pulled out another file. Rebecca's restraining order was dismissed because Patterson testified as a character witness for Marcus. Said Marcus was a dedicated officer and devoted father who was being unfairly targeted by a mentally unstable ex-wife. Grace wanted to put her fist through the wall. The system had failed Rebecca 8 years ago and was failing her again now. They developed a plan. Grace would approach Rebecca directly, offer to help her get to the FBI where Marcus's local connections couldn't reach. Linda would arrange a contact, an old friend in the FBI's domestic terrorism unit who owed her a favor. Meanwhile, Linda would use her personal resources to keep tabs on Marcus's movements. If we spook him, he might accelerate his timeline, Linda warned. If we don't act, someone will die, Grace countered. The next morning, Rex came home from Dr. Chen's clinic, groggy from surgery but stable. Grace held him gently, whispering promises she intended to keep. I need you healthy, boy. We've got work to do. Saturday afternoon, Grace carried a breakfast casserole across the yard. She'd rehearsed her approach, but when Becky answered the door, exhausted, afraid, barely holding herself together, all of Grace's carefully planned words vanished. Mrs. Thornton, I know about the USB, and I know Marcus is hunting for it. Becky's facade shattered. She began crying, harsh sobs that shook her thin frame. He's going to find us. He always does. For the first time, Becky let Grace inside. The house looked like a temporary camp. Suitcases still packed, minimal furniture, everything positioned for a quick escape. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, all rendered in dark colors, filled with shadowy figures and scared faces. The sewing machine sat in the corner like a shrine, covered with a faded sheet. Becky's story poured out. She'd married Marcus at 25, dazzled by his confidence and status. The first year had been perfect. Then came the controlling behavior, checking her phone, limiting her friends, monitoring her movements. When she got pregnant with Benjamin, Marcus seemed excited. But after the baby was born, Marcus couldn't handle the crying. Becky had installed the nanny cam on instinct, some part of her already knowing she'd need proof. Coming home from the grocery store to find Benjamin dead, Marcus on the phone with 911, his face arranged in perfect grief. That moment had broken something fundamental in Becky's understanding of reality. I wanted to tell the truth, Becky whispered, but Marcus said if I spoke up he'd make sure I never saw Lily again. He had friends in Child Protective Services. He could make me disappear and keep the girls. She'd found the USB backup weeks later and hidden it in the sewing machine, following Eleanor's deathbed instructions. For 7 more years, she'd stayed, too terrified to leave, having 2 more children, watching Marcus play the role of devoted father while she lived in constant fear. 6 months ago, she'd discovered she was pregnant again, and she'd overheard Marcus's phone call, his casual discussion of handling another inconvenient child. That's when she'd finally run. He found us in 3 weeks the first time, Becky said. 2 weeks the second time. Now he's here again. He'll always find us. He has resources I can't fight. Grace took Becky's hands. I can help you get to the FBI. Someone Marcus doesn't know, can't influence. The FBI won't protect us from a cop. They will with evidence. And I have a contact. Grace's voice hardened. What's your alternative? Keep running forever? You're pregnant. How long before you can't run anymore? Becky's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, barely showing but definitely there. "Why do you care? You don't even know us." Grace's throat tightened. "Because 8 years ago, I knew Benjamin was murdered, and I couldn't save him. I've lived with that failure every single day. I won't fail again." Something in Grace's rawness reached Becky. She nodded slowly. "What's your plan?" They strategized through the afternoon. The plan was risky but simple. Becky would accidentally let Marcus know she was going to the Portland FBI office Monday morning. He'd likely intercept her before she arrived. Linda's team would follow at a distance, waiting for Marcus to make an illegal move. Once he committed assault or attempted kidnapping with witnesses, they'd have grounds for arrest. Then the USB evidence would be presented to the FBI with clear context. "What if something goes wrong?" Becky's voice shook. "He'll kill me and take the girls." "That's why Rex and I will be with you," Grace said. "And Linda will have backup following us." Sunday morning, they moved Lily and Ava to a safe house run by Linda's cousin 2 hours away. The goodbye was wrenching. Lily clung to her mother, trying to be brave, while Ava pressed a drawing into Grace's hands, a picture of Rex as a superhero with a cape. "For Mr. Rex," Ava whispered, "because he saves people." Grace's eyes burned. She hadn't cried since Michael's funeral, but this little girl's faith in her and Rex was almost more than she could bear. Becky made the phone call Sunday afternoon, deliberately choosing a colleague she knew would report back to Marcus. "Hi, this is Rebecca Thornton. I need to speak with the FBI office about a domestic matter. Monday at 9 a.m.? Yes, I'll be there. I'm bringing evidence on a storage device." The trap was set. Grace gave Becky a panic button, old police equipment she'd kept from her working days. Rex, recovered enough to function, would stay with Becky overnight as an early warning system. If Marcus approached, Rex would alert them with enough time to call for help. Sunday night, Grace kept watch from her window. Linda's team was positioned down the street in unmarked vehicles from a different county, officers Marcus wouldn't recognize. The sewing machine sat silent in Becky's house. No more need to hide, but Marcus didn't come, not yet. Grace couldn't sleep. She sat in her living room with her old service pistol on the coffee table, watching the dark house next door. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Marcus withdrew $10,000 cash this afternoon. Grace's stomach dropped. That was either escape money or payment for hired help. She texted back, "He's not coming alone." Linda's response chilled her. "My team spotted 2 unknown vehicles circling your block. Started about an hour ago." Grace moved to the window. Sure enough, a dark SUV cruised past slowly, the driver's face hidden behind tinted windows. 10 minutes later, a sedan made the same circuit. She called Becky. "Barricade your doors, now. He's sending people." "Should we run?" "Where? He'll chase you forever. We end it tonight." At 3 a.m., Grace heard it, Rex's bark, sharp and urgent. The K9 alert that meant danger was imminent. She grabbed her gun and her phone, dialing Linda even as she moved toward her back door. "It's happening," she said when Linda answered. "Multiple suspects approaching. Get here now." "We're moving. ETA 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Grace looked at the clock. 5 minutes could be a lifetime. She ran to Becky's back door, found it still locked. Through the window, she could see Rex in the living room, hackles raised, teeth bared. 2 figures dressed in black were trying to jimmy the front door. Grace made a decision. She used the spare key Becky had given her and let herself in through the back. Rex turned, recognized her, and returned his attention to the threat. The front door burst open. 2 men entered, one carrying a crowbar, the other with what looked like a chloroform rag. "Not here to kill, here to kidnap." "Just get the woman and the USB," one muttered. "Boss wants both." "What about the old lady if she interferes?" "Boss said eliminate her." Grace stepped into view, her pistol steady despite her racing heart. "I'm interfering." The 2 men froze, their eyes widening at the sight of Grace's service pistol pointed steadily at their center mass. They were younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the lean build of men who worked with their hands, not professional criminals, probably laborers Marcus had paid for dirty work. "Lady, we don't want trouble," the one with the crowbar said, raising his free hand slowly. "Then you should have stayed home tonight." Grace's voice was ice. "Breaking and entering. Attempted kidnapping. You're looking at 10 years minimum." The second man, holding the chloroform rag, took a half step forward. "Look, we're just doing a job. A job that involves drugging and kidnapping a pregnant woman?" Grace's finger moved closer to the trigger. "Drop your weapons. Both of you. Now." The crowbar clattered to the floor, but the second man's eyes shifted, calculating odds. Grace saw the decision form before he moved. He was going to rush her, banking on the assumption that an old woman wouldn't actually shoot. He was wrong. Grace fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The crack of the gunshot in the enclosed space was deafening. Both men jerked back, hands raised higher. "Next one goes center mass," Grace said calmly. "I was a cop for 35 years. I don't miss, and I don't bluff." Rex moved then, positioning himself between Grace and the intruders, his lips pulled back to show teeth designed to take down suspects twice his size. His growl resonated through the room, and both men pressed back against the wall. "Jesus Christ, nobody said anything about a trained attack dog," the first man hissed. The front door exploded inward for the second time. Marcus Thornton entered with his own weapon drawn, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket. For a moment, everyone froze in a tableau of pointing guns. "Police, drop your weapon." Marcus's voice carried the authority of his badge, even though he was clearly off duty. "I am police," Grace countered, her aim never wavering. "Retired, but still licensed to carry. And you're not on duty, Detective Thornton. You're assaulting your ex-wife." Marcus's eyes swept the room, taking in his hired muscle cowering against the wall, Rex positioned to attack, and Grace standing her ground. His professional mask flickered, and Grace saw the calculation beneath. He was weighing options, looking for an angle. "You idiots," Marcus spat at the 2 men. "I paid you for a simple job." "Man, you didn't say nothing about no trained attack dog and an armed cop," the second man protested. "This ain't worth whatever you're paying." "Shut up." Marcus's gun swung toward his own hired help, then back to Grace. His composure was cracking, the carefully maintained facade of the devoted father and good cop falling away. "Where is she?" "Safe. Where you'll never touch her again." "She has something that belongs to me." "You mean evidence of you murdering your son?" Grace's voice was steady despite her hammering heart. "That doesn't belong to you. That belongs to a jury." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've been sitting on that conspiracy theory for 8 years, Harper. Nobody believed you then. Nobody will believe you now. We have proof this time. The USB drive your mother helped Rebecca hide from you." Something dangerous flashed across Marcus's face at the mention of his mother. "My mother was a senile old woman who should have minded her own business, just like you should mind yours. Is that why you poisoned her insulin? Because she was going to expose you? You can't prove that." But his smile confirmed the truth. They stood in Mexican standoff, Grace aiming at Marcus, Marcus aiming at Grace, Rex poised to attack, and the two hired men frozen against the wall, clearly regretting their life choices. Marcus's expression shifted, became almost conversational. "You know what your problem is, Harper? You're a has-been, a failure. You couldn't save Benjamin 8 years ago. You couldn't save your own son." Grace flinched involuntarily. Marcus saw it and pressed harder. "That's right. I know all about Michael. PTSD, wasn't it? Ate his gun because his mother pushed him too hard to be the perfect cop. Some mother you were. Some cop. You failed everyone who ever counted on you." Grace's hand trembled. Every word was a knife in an old wound that had never healed. Michael's death had broken something fundamental in her, a guilt she'd carried every single day for 3 years. "You don't talk about my son," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "Why not? Truth hurts?" Marcus's smile widened, cruel and calculated. "You failed him just like you're going to fail Rebecca. You're old, you're slow, and you're alone." "What are you going to do, Harper? Shoot a decorated police detective? They'll lock you up and throw away the key." Behind Marcus, Grace saw movement in the hallway. Becky emerged from the basement, her face pale but determined. In her hand, she held a small black USB drive. "That's enough," Becky said, her voice shaking but clear. Marcus whirled, his attention snapping to his ex-wife. His entire demeanor changed, the mask sliding back into place, his voice suddenly gentle, pleading. "Rebecca, baby, come here. Let's talk about this. I'm not your baby. I'm your victim. I love you. I've always loved you. You killed our son." Becky held up the USB drive. "And I have the video to prove it." Marcus's face contorted. He wouldn't stop crying. What was I supposed to do? The casual confession hung in the air. Grace saw the moment Marcus realized what he'd just admitted, saw the rage that replaced calculation. He'd been careful for 8 years, and in 30 seconds of anger, he'd thrown it all away. "You're admitting it?" Grace asked, her voice hard. Marcus's jaw clenched. "Doesn't matter. It's your word against mine. No recording, no proof." At that moment, sirens split the night. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Car doors slammed, heavy footsteps pounded up the walkway. Linda Hayes burst through the door with 4 officers behind her, weapons drawn. She took in the scene instantly. Grace and Marcus both armed, the 2 hired thugs against the wall, Rex on alert, Becky holding the USB drive. "Everyone lower your weapons, now!" Linda's command voice filled the room. Grace lowered her pistol immediately. Marcus hesitated, then slowly did the same. "Detective Hayes," Marcus said, his tone shifting to aggrieved innocence. "Thank God you're here. This woman," he gestured at Grace, "is holding me at gunpoint. And these men broke into my ex-wife's house. He hired us. One of the men blurted. "He paid us 10 grand to grab his ex-wife and some USB drive." "I've never seen these men before in my life," Marcus said smoothly. Officer Patterson stepped forward then, a man in his 50s with Marcus's same smug confidence. "Detective Hayes, I was first on scene. I heard the exchange. Harper threatened Detective Thornton with her firearm. This is clearly a case of an unstable retiree harassing an officer." Linda looked at Patterson with an expression Grace couldn't quite read. "You were first on scene? I didn't authorize anyone to enter before I arrived." Patterson's confidence wavered slightly. "I heard the commotion. I entered to assess the situation." "From where?" "You were positioned on the north side. This is the south entrance. I relocated. Without reporting it to me? Linda's voice had gone cold. Show me your body camera footage. My camera malfunctioned. Grace spoke up. Like it malfunctioned 8 years ago during Benjamin Thornton's investigation? Linda's head snapped toward Patterson. You were the supervising detective on that case. So what? You closed the case, against Detective Harper's recommendation that there was evidence of foul play. Patterson's face reddened. There was no evidence. It was Sid's. Because you buried the evidence, Grace said. You and Marcus. The original nanny cam footage disappeared from the evidence locker. The ME changed his ruling after pressure from above, and I got transferred out of investigations 2 weeks later for refusing to let it go. Linda looked between Grace, her mentor, the woman who'd taught her everything about being a good cop, and Patterson, a colleague she'd worked alongside for years. Grace saw the moment Linda made her choice. Patterson, take off your badge. You're under investigation as of this moment. Linda, you can't be serious. Badge and gun. Now. Marcus tried to salvage the situation. Hayes, you're letting a retired cop poison your judgment. Shut up, Thornton. Linda turned to him. You too. Badge and gun. I'm a decorated detective. You're under investigation for murder, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy. Badge and gun, or I'll have my officers remove them. Marcus's face went dark with rage. In that moment, Grace saw the mask drop completely. This was the man who'd strangled a 2-year-old for crying. This was the man who'd poisoned his own mother. This was the man who'd been hunting Rebecca for 6 months with murder in his heart. Marcus grabbed Becky faster than anyone could react, his arm around her throat, his service weapon pressed to her temple. Officers shouted, weapons swinging toward him, but Marcus was already backing toward the door with Becky as a shield. Nobody moves or she dies, Marcus snarled. I'm walking out of here. We're going to Mexico and starting over. You're making this worse, Linda said, her weapon steady on Marcus. Worse? I'm dead anyway if that USB goes public. Marcus's grip tightened on Becky's throat. She struggled, her face going red. You're coming with me. You're still my wife. You're carrying my child. We're going to be a family again. I'll never go anywhere with you. Becky's voice came out strangled but defiant. Marcus hit her with the butt of his gun, not hard enough to knock her out, but enough to stun her. You don't have a choice. Grace had commanded Rex to stay when the police arrived. A firm command the German shepherd had obeyed despite every instinct screaming at him to protect. But now, seeing Becky in danger, bleeding from a blow to the head, Rex made a decision. He disobeyed. 75 pounds of trained police dog launched across the room. Marcus's gun went off, the bullet grazing Rex's shoulder, but the dog didn't stop. He hit Marcus like a missile, knocking him away from Becky. They went down in a tangle, Marcus screaming as Rex's jaws clamped around his gun arm. Officers swarmed forward. Becky scrambled away, collapsing into Grace's arms. Marcus thrashed on the floor, trying to shake Rex off, but the German shepherd's grip was unbreakable, years of training overriding pain and fear. Get it off me! Get it off! Grace's command cut through the chaos. Rex, hold! Rex adjusted his grip, not breaking skin, but maintaining pressure that made it impossible for Marcus to move his arm. Officers moved in with handcuffs, securing Marcus's free hand, then his legs. Rex, release. The dog let go immediately and limped to Becky, nuzzling her gently to make sure she was okay. Blood streaked his shoulder, but his tail wagged as Becky threw her arms around his neck, sobbing. Marcus was hauled to his feet, handcuffed and furious. Patterson stood beside him in cuffs, his career ending in the same moment. The 2 hired men were being read their rights, looking relieved that at least they'd cooperated. Linda took the USB drive from Becky's shaking hands. "This will be submitted to the FBI as evidence. Chain of custody will be preserved. I promise you, Rebecca, he's going away for life." Dr. Sarah Chen arrived within 20 minutes of Linda's call, her mobile surgical equipment packed in cases she carried into Grace's kitchen. Rex lay on the table, his breathing shallow, blood seeping through the bandage Grace had pressed to his shoulder. The bullet had gone clean through, missing major arteries, but the wound was serious. "Grace," Dr. Chen said gently, examining Rex with careful hands. "His system is already compromised from the poisoning last week. This new trauma, his body might not be able to handle both." Grace's hand trembled as she stroked Rex's head. "What are his chances?" Dr. Chen's face was grave. "Honestly, maybe 30%. His organs are still recovering from the poison. This much blood loss, the stress, the shock. It might be too much." The kitchen blurred. Grace pressed her forehead against Rex's, feeling his labored breathing against her cheek. "You've saved my life a dozen times. Now it's my turn." Becky stood in the doorway, her face pale, blood crusted in her hair from where Marcus had hit her. "This is my fault. He saved me. He was protecting me." "He was doing his job," Grace said, her voice thick. "Protecting is what he does." The surgery took 3 hours. Grace assisted, holding instruments with hands that had helped in field operations decades ago, watching Dr. Chen work with steady precision. Becky watched from the corner, unable to look away, silently praying to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore. At 2 in the morning, Dr. Chen tied off the final suture. "He's stable, but critical. The next 48 hours will tell us everything." They moved Rex to a dog bed in Grace's living room, hooked him to monitors Dr. Chen had borrowed from her clinic. His breathing was shallow, his heartbeat irregular on the screen. Grace sat beside him as the house grew quiet, everyone else finally sleeping. Becky upstairs in the guest room, Dr. Chen dozing on the couch to monitor Rex through the night. Grace was alone with her dog and her demons. At 3 a.m., her composure finally shattered. The tears came in waves, years of grief and guilt and exhaustion breaking through the walls she'd built since Michael's death. She held Rex's paw, feeling how fragile it was, how easily life could slip away. "You can't leave too," she whispered. "You're all I have left. Everyone else is gone. Robert, Michael, everyone I've ever loved. You're the only family I have." Her mind spiraled backward through loss. Robert's heart attack, sudden and brutal, leaving her alone at 63. Michael's death 3 years later, the suicide that had never made sense. Her brilliant son, who'd always been so strong, suddenly gone. The guilt of that had nearly destroyed her. The certainty that she'd pushed him too hard, demanded too much, that her expectations had driven him to despair. She looked at the photo on her mantel, Robert and Michael together, both smiling, both gone, and Rex, who'd been there through it all, who'd tried to alert her to Michael's struggles, who'd mourned with her when Robert died. "I didn't listen to you about Michael," Grace said, her voice breaking. "You tried to tell me something was wrong. You kept trying to get my attention those last few weeks, and I was too busy with work to notice. If I'd listened—" Rex's ear twitched at her voice, but his eyes stayed closed. "If you make it through this, I promise, no more cases. We'll retire for real. We'll spend our days walking, sitting on the porch, just being together. I'll learn to live again instead of just surviving." but I need you here to teach me how." She held his paw until her hand cramped, watching the monitor track his weakening heartbeat, begging whatever force controlled the universe to give her one more chance, one more day, one more walk with the only living creature who'd never left her. At 4 a.m., her phone rang. Linda calling from the police station. "Grace, I'm reviewing the USB contents. There's more on here than just Benjamin's murder." Grace's free hand tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "Rebecca recorded Marcus for years. Secret camera in their bedroom. There are 15 video files, confessions about everything, poisoning Eleanor, paying off Patterson, covering up the Benjamin investigation." Linda's voice dropped. "And Grace, there's something about Michael." The world stopped. "What about Michael?" "You need to sit down for this." "I am sitting. Tell me." Linda played an audio clip. Marcus's voice, casual and cold, from 3 years ago. "Yeah. Harper's son. He's been asking questions about the Benjamin case. Getting too close. I gave him Percocet laced with fentanyl. Made it look like he scored them off the street. Told him they were from the evidence locker. Kid trusted me. Found him dead next day. Ruled suicide by overdose. 2 birds, 1 stone, eliminated the threat and destroyed Harper." Marcus was laughing on the recording, laughing about murdering her son. The phone fell from Grace's hand. She couldn't breathe. The room spun. Everything she'd believed for 3 years, that Michael had given up, that he'd been too weak, that her expectations had broken him, all of it was a lie. Michael hadn't committed suicide. Marcus had murdered him to hurt Grace, to silence him, to cover up Benjamin's death. Her son had been killed because Grace had tried to do the right thing 8 years ago. Monday morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through Grace's curtains. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. The revelation about Michael had torn through her like a bullet, destroying 3 years of carefully constructed guilt and replacing it with a grief so pure and raw it felt like dying. At 6 a.m., Rex's eyes opened for the first time since surgery. Grace was still sitting beside him, her hand on his head, when his tail gave a weak thump against the dog bed. Dr. Chen rushed over, checking his vitals, her face breaking into a cautious smile. "Grace, look. His heart rate is stabilizing, blood pressure improving. This is really good." Rex tried to lift his head. Grace helped him, tears streaming down her face. "Hey, boy. Welcome back." He licked her hand, the gesture so familiar and right that Grace felt something break open in her chest. Not more grief, but something else. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of healing. By noon, Rex was drinking water. By 3 p.m., he was eating small amounts. By evening, he was standing shakily, his legs trembling but holding his weight. Dr. Chen kept saying it was remarkable that dogs didn't recover this fast from combined poisoning and gunshot wounds. But Grace knew better. Rex had heard her last night. He'd heard her beg him not to leave her alone, and he'd decided to stay. "You're stronger than me," Grace whispered, scratching behind his ears. "You always have been." Linda arrived Monday afternoon with a thick folder and the exhausted expression of someone who'd been working for 36 hours straight. She sat at Grace's kitchen table, the same table where they'd planned Rebecca's rescue, and laid out the complete picture of Marcus Thornton's crimes. "I've been going through his communications for the past 3 years, Linda said. He targeted Michael deliberately. Grace's hands clenched on her coffee mug, but she forced herself to listen. Michael had been working as a PTSD counselor for returning veterans. One veteran had mentioned in passing that Detective Thornton had offered him pills from the evidence locker. Michael had thought it was strange and reported it to Internal Affairs. IA had dismissed it. Thornton was a decorated officer with a clean record, and the veteran was deemed unreliable. But Michael hadn't let it go. He'd started digging, making connections, asking old-timers about past cases. Eventually, he'd learned about the Benjamin Thornton SIDS case and his mother's involvement in the investigation. Michael had read Grace's original report, seen her notes about suspected foul play, and understood that his mother had been right. He was building a case against Marcus, Linda explained. Talking to former colleagues, collecting information. He got close to the truth, close enough that Marcus found out. Marcus had befriended Michael, offered sympathy about his PTSD struggles, suggested they grab a beer to talk. He'd gained Michael's trust, then offered him pain medication. "These are safe," Marcus had told him. "We confiscated them from a dealer. Pure pharmaceutical grade." Michael had trusted a fellow officer. He'd taken the pills Marcus gave him, and he died that night. Marcus had been the first responder, had called it in himself, had planted evidence suggesting Michael had scored drugs illegally from a street dealer. The narrative had been perfect. Troubled veteran cop with PTSD, relapsed on pain medication, died of overdose. Suicide by slow motion. Grace had believed it. For 3 years, she'd carried the crushing guilt that her expectations, her pressure, her legacy had driven her son to despair and death. "It wasn't your fault," Linda said gently. "Grace, look at me. It wasn't your fault. But if I'd fought harder 8 years ago, if I hadn't let them bury the Benjamin case, if I'd—" "You tried. The system failed you. Patterson and Marcus made sure of it." Linda reached across the table, gripping Grace's hand. "Your son died because he was a good cop trying to do the right thing, just like his mother taught him." Grace broke then, truly broke, crying for the first time since Michael's funeral. Not the quiet tears of last night, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. Linda held her while she fell apart, while 3 years of misplaced guilt transformed into clean, honest grief. Michael hadn't been weak. He'd been murdered, and Grace could finally stop blaming herself. That evening, Becky came downstairs with Lily and Ava, reunited with her daughters that afternoon. The girls ran to Rex, hugging him gently, careful of his bandaged shoulder. Ava whispered something in his ear that made his tail wag weakly. "Thank you for saving Mommy," Ava said clearly, her selective mutism apparently abandoned in the aftermath of crisis. Becky approached Grace slowly, her own face showing the marks of the past 48 hours, bruising from Marcus's blow, exhaustion from fear, and adrenaline crash. "I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to. You lost your son because of my husband." Grace shook her head firmly. "That's not on you. You were trying to survive. You were protecting your daughters, and you thought, correctly, that no one would believe you." Becky's eyes filled. "I should have been braver 8 years ago. If I'd spoken up, if I'd fought harder, then Marcus would have killed you too," Grace said bluntly. "And Lily and Ava would have grown up with a murderer as their only parent. You did what you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that." Becky twisted her hands together. "I need to tell you something. About the sewing machine and Eleanor." Eleanor, Marcus's mother, hadn't just given Becky the antique sewing machine as a wedding present. 2 days before Eleanor died, she'd come to Becky's house and sat her down for a conversation that Becky had never forgotten. "Marcus killed Benjamin," Eleanor had said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I know my son. I've always known what he was capable of. I should have stopped him years ago, but I was weak. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I was imagining things, but I wasn't." Eleanor had given Becky the sewing machine that day, showing her the hidden compartment her own mother had installed during World War II for hiding valuables. "Record everything," Eleanor had instructed. "Build your case, and when the time comes, run. Use this machine to protect what matters." Eleanor had died the next day from a sudden diabetic episode. The insulin in her system had been 3 times her normal dose. No investigation was ever conducted. Marcus had handled his mother's death personally, filed all the paperwork, ensured everything was ruled accidental. "She gave me the tools to escape," Becky said, "and to bring justice. She was braver than I was." "She was brave when it mattered," Grace agreed. "Like you were brave when it mattered, like my son was brave." She paused. "Being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you act anyway, despite the fear." Wednesday brought legal closure. Linda called with updates. Marcus was being charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for Benjamin and Michael, attempted murder for Eleanor, attempted kidnapping of Rebecca, assault, and conspiracy. Patterson faced charges of obstruction of justice, accessory to murder, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Both men had been denied bail. The FBI had taken custody of the USB evidence, analyzed it thoroughly, authenticated every video and audio file. Marcus's voice had been verified through forensic analysis. The video of Benjamin's murder was clear, undeniable, time-stamped, and geotagged. There would be no escaping justice this time. The prosecutor was recommending life without parole for both men. Marcus's lawyer was already floating a plea deal to avoid trial and the death penalty. The prosecutor had called Rebecca personally. "He'll die in prison, I promise you that." Federal charges were added for interstate drug trafficking. Marcus had been stealing from the evidence locker for years, selling pharmaceuticals, using the profits to maintain his lifestyle and pay off accomplices. The scope of his crimes was staggering. The police department launched an internal investigation of the entire unit. 3 additional officers were suspended for knowing about the corruption and staying silent. The chief announced the creation of a civilian oversight board to prevent future cover-ups. Grace was invited to serve on the board. "Make sure this never happens again," the chief had said. She considered it. Maybe one more case after all. Maybe Michael's death could lead to real change. 2 weeks later, Grace visited Michael's grave for the first time since learning the truth. She brought sunflowers, his favorite, and sat on the grass beside the headstone. Rex lay beside her, still healing but strong enough for the walk. "Hey, baby," Grace said softly. "I know the truth now. You didn't give up. You were murdered for trying to do the right thing." Her voice caught. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you, but I've gotten justice for you. Marcus will spend the rest of his life in prison, thinking about what he took from both of us." She placed her hand on the sun-warmed stone. "I thought after you died that my life was over, that I was just waiting to join you and your father. But then Rebecca and her girls needed help, and I realized I'm not done yet. You taught me that. To stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. So I'm going to keep standing as long as I can, with Rex by my side." The wind rustled through the trees overhead. Grace felt, for the first time in 3 years, a sense of peace settling over her shoulders. Not happiness. That might never fully return, but peace, acceptance, the understanding that she'd done everything she could, that Michael's death wasn't her failure. "Rest now, my brave boy," she whispered. "I love you, always will." She stood, joints protesting, and walked back to her car with Rex limping steadily beside her. For the first time since Michael died, Grace felt the weight lift slightly. Justice had been served. The truth had been revealed, and somehow, against all odds, she was still here, still fighting, still living. 6 months later, November brought the kind of clear, crisp autumn day that made Oregon famous. The Willow Creek Police Department's ceremony hall was packed. Officers in dress uniform, community members, local press, and a surprise representative from the FBI's Portland field office. Grace stood at the front in her own dress uniform, kept pristine through 5 years of retirement, the navy blue fabric still fitting though her frame had thinned with age and stress. Beside her, Rex wore a ceremonial canine vest, his shoulder fully healed, his coat gleaming from that morning's careful grooming. At 7.5 years old, he was in his prime, dignified and alert despite the crowd. The chief of police approached the podium, his voice carrying through the room. "We're gathered today to honor a dog who represents everything our canine program stands for: loyalty, bravery, and unwavering dedication to protecting the innocent. Rex was poisoned, shot, and nearly died, but he never gave up. He saved 3 lives and helped bring 2 corrupt officers to justice. He reminded us why we have canine units, because sometimes 4 legs and a pure heart see truth that 2 legs miss." Grace glanced at the front row where Becky sat with Lily and Ava, visibly pregnant now at 7 months, her belly round beneath a simple blue dress. Linda Hayes sat beside them in her detective's suit, and Dr. Sarah Chen was there too, beaming with pride at her patient's recovery. When Grace was called to speak, her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. Public speaking had never been her strength. She'd always preferred action to words. 35 years ago, I joined the police force because I wanted to make a difference, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I thought that meant catching bad guys, writing reports, following procedures. But Rex taught me something different. He taught me that making a difference means trusting your instincts when everyone tells you you're wrong. It means not giving up when the system fails. It means protecting those who can't protect themselves, even when it costs you everything. She looked down at Rex, who gazed back at her with those intelligent brown eyes. Rex is a better cop than I ever was. He never doubted, never gave up, never stopped believing that truth matters. I'm honored to be his partner, but honestly, he was always the senior officer." The audience laughed softly, and Grace felt some of her tension ease. The chief presented the Honorary Canine Service Award, a custom medal that he attached to Rex's collar. Lily and Ava were invited forward to present Rex with a bouquet of dog-safe flowers. Ava knelt beside him, whispering, "You're my hero." And Rex licked her face gently, his tail wagging. The photographer captured the moment. Grace, Rex, Becky, and the girls together, all of them alive and safe. That photo would run on the front page of the Willow Creek Chronicle the next morning under the headline, "Retired Canine Saves Family, Exposes Corruption." The FBI representative stepped forward for the final announcement. "On behalf of the FBI director, I want to commend Rebecca Thornton for her extraordinary bravery in collecting evidence over 8 years under impossible circumstances. Her testimony and evidence led directly to the conviction of 2 corrupt law enforcement officers and revealed systemic failures in oversight. We're establishing the Benjamin Thornton Memorial Fund to support domestic violence survivors and children who've lost parents to violence. Mrs. Thornton, your courage has already helped change policies at the federal level." Becky stood, tears streaming down her face, and accepted the commendation. Grace saw the transformation in her. Shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, the constant fear finally beginning to fade. She was healing. They all were. After the ceremony, Grace's backyard filled with people. Linda had brought food. Too much food, covering the long folding tables Grace had borrowed from the community center. Dr. Chen arrived with a special dog-friendly cake she'd baked for Rex. Neighbors from up and down the street appeared with covered dishes and warm wishes. Grace stood by her grill, flipping burgers using Robert's old recipe, and marveled at how full her house felt. For the first time in 5 years, laughter and conversation filled the spaces that had been silent for so long. Becky asked for everyone's attention, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I have an announcement to make. Grace, this especially concerns you." Grace set down her spatula, suddenly nervous. "What is it?" "I've been seeing a therapist, working through everything that happened, and I've made a decision." Becky's voice grew stronger. "I'm not running anymore. I'm staying in Willow Creek. This is home now." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Really? Really? If that's okay with you?" "Okay. I'd love that." Becky took a deep breath. "Actually, I have a favor to ask. My landlord is selling the rental house. I need to move, and your house, it's too big for just you and Rex." She paused, meeting Grace's eyes. "Would you consider letting us move in? I can help with the mortgage. We could look after each other." Grace looked at Lily and Ava, both watching hopefully. At Becky, nervous but determined. At the life growing in Becky's belly, a new beginning, a second chance at the family Marcus had tried to destroy. "This house has been too quiet for too long," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes. Move in. All of you." Lily and Ava rushed forward, wrapping Grace in a fierce hug. "Does this mean Rex is our dog too?" Ava asked. "Rex is his own dog," Grace said, ruffling the girl's hair. "But yes, he'll protect all of us." "Can we help train him?" Lily asked eagerly. "Like real canine handlers?" Grace smiled. "I think Rex would like that." Linda pulled Grace aside later, a knowing smile on her face. "You know you're getting a ready-made family, right? 3 kids, a baby on the way. Your quiet retirement is over." "I know," Grace admitted. "It's terrifying." "You'll be great. You always are when it matters." Linda paused. "What about you? When are you going to start living again instead of just surviving?" Grace looked across her yard, at Becky helping Lily and Ava play fetch with Rex, at her neighbors laughing over food, at the home that felt alive for the first time since Robert died. "I think I just did." 2 weeks later, moving day arrived with a flurry of activity. Becky's minimal possessions fit easily into Grace's house. Lily took Michael's old room, which Grace had finally cleaned out, packed away the memories, and painted a soft yellow at Lily's request. Ava chose the guest room and immediately began covering the walls with her drawings. Becky insisted Grace keep the master bedroom, moving herself into the downstairs office that Grace converted into a bedroom. The antique sewing machine was given a place of honor in the living room, no longer hidden or covered. Becky used it regularly now, making curtains for the windows, quilts for the beds, clothes for the girls. The sound of the machine had transformed from a symbol of fear into the comforting rhythm of home. They fell into routines that felt both new and ancient. Grace woke at 5 a.m. with Rex for their walk. Becky made breakfast at 7, revealing herself to be an excellent cook who'd learned from her grandmother. Grace drove the girls to school at 8, discovering she loved the morning ritual of backpacks and lunchboxes, and Lily's chatter about homework. Afternoons were spent with Lily teaching Rex new tricks under Grace's supervision, while Ava drew portraits of their growing family. Dinners were mandatory family affairs, everyone at the table, phones away, sharing stories about their days. Grace hadn't realized how much she'd missed this, the simple warmth of people who cared about each other gathered around a meal. Evenings brought homework help, board games, and Grace reading bedtime stories to girls who'd never had a stable grandmother figure. Some nights, Grace would finish a story and find both girls asleep, Ava's hand still clutching her sleeve, and she'd sit there in the dim light of the nightlight, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift of getting to be someone's grandmother. The financial relief was equally transformative. Becky's rent contribution covered the mortgage Grace had been struggling to pay. Grace's pension covered utilities and food. Together, they were stable. In a way, neither had been alone. "I should have gotten roommates years ago," Grace joked one evening over tea. Becky's expression turned serious. "We're not roommates, we're family. Grace had to excuse herself. Overcome by emotion she wasn't quite ready to show. In January, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, Becky's water broke. Grace woke to sounds of movement, found Becky in the hallway, her face tight with pain and fear. "Is it time?" Grace asked. "Yes. But Grace, I'm scared." "Of labor?" "Of Marcus. Even though he's in prison, he's still in my head. This baby. What if I can't protect him? What if—" Grace took Becky's hands firmly. "Marcus can't hurt you anymore. This baby is yours. Only yours. He gets no claim, no rights, no part of this child's life. You're free, Rebecca. And you're not alone anymore." At the hospital, Grace, Lily, and Ava camped in the waiting room. Linda arrived despite the ungodly hour, bringing coffee and donuts. "Wouldn't miss this," she said simply. Labor lasted 6 hours. When the nurse finally invited them back, Becky was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blue. "Grace, meet Benjamin Michael Thornton," Becky said softly. "Benjamin for my first son, Michael for the officer who tried to save him. I'd like you to be his godmother." Grace took the baby carefully. This tiny, perfect life that represented hope and second chances and the continuation of love, despite everything Marcus had tried to destroy. "I'd be honored." Lily and Ava met their brother with gentle curiosity, touching his tiny fingers, marveling at how small he was. Rex was brought up as a therapy dog exception, and he sniffed the baby carefully before lying down beside the bed, taking up his position as protector. "A year ago, I thought we'd die," Becky said quietly, watching her children with tears running down her face. "I thought Marcus would eventually catch us and kill us all. But you saved us. And now Benjamin gets to live, really live, without fear." Grace settled into the chair beside the bed, the baby in her arms, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Michael and Robert were gone, but their love continued through her, through these people she'd chosen as family, through this baby named for the sons they'd lost. 6 months later, summer returned to Oregon with warm, golden days. Grace's backyard was decorated for celebration. a banner reading, "Welcome home, Benjamin," strung between trees. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Linda and Dr. Chen chatted with neighbors. Grace's former K-9 unit colleagues had driven in from Portland, wanting to see Rex and meet the family he'd saved. Grace stood at the grill, flipping burgers with Robert's ancient spatula, and watched the scene unfold. Becky sat in the shade, nursing Benjamin, who was thriving, healthy, happy, safe. Lily was teaching Ava how to throw a tennis ball for Rex, who retrieved it patiently despite his age. The old German shepherd moved more slowly now, but his eyes were still sharp, still protective, still full of the dignity that had defined his entire career. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Grace settled into her chair with Benjamin sleeping in her arms. Becky had asked her to hold him while she helped serve dessert. Rex lay at her feet, his graying muzzle resting on his paws. Lily and Ava played nearby, their laughter carrying on the warm evening air. Grace looked at the camera someone had set up for photos and found herself smiling, genuinely smiling, the kind that reached her eyes and meant something real. She thought about Robert and Michael, about loss and grief, and the long years of surviving rather than living. She thought about the scared woman and frightened children who'd moved in next door 6 months ago, about a USB drive hidden in a sewing machine, about an old dog who'd refused to give up. "They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks," Grace murmured, scratching Rex's ears with her free hand. "But you taught me the most important one, didn't you, boy? You taught me how to love again, and that's the only trick that really matters." Rex's tail thumped against the grass in agreement. Around them, their chosen family laughed and lived and healed together. And Grace Harper, 68 years old, widow, bereaved mother, retired cop, discovered that sometimes the best chapters come after you think the story's over. Sometimes saving others is how you save yourself. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that our story isn't over, even when we've lost everything we thought defined us. Grace believed her purpose died with her husband and son, that she was simply marking time until she could join them. But then a terrified neighbor and a loyal dog reminded her of something profound. Family isn't always the one you're born into. It's the one you choose when someone desperately needs choosing. How many of us have convinced ourselves it's too late for new beginnings? That we've already lived our important chapters? Grace learned that protecting others, whether it's standing up against injustice, trusting your instincts when everyone doubts you, or opening your home to strangers who become family, that's when we discover we're still vital, still needed, still capable of extraordinary courage. The deepest happiness doesn't come from absence of loss. It comes from finding purpose again, despite the loss. From realizing that an empty house can fill with laughter, that a grieving heart can love again, that wisdom earned through suffering is the greatest gift we can offer those still struggling in darkness. Have you ever discovered unexpected family in the most unlikely places? What made you realize it was time to stop surviving and start truly living again? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.